The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The apostles returned from their mission. They gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest for a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus. Friends, it's good to be with you again this weekend. One name that stood out among many above the rest in the civil rights movement was in the 50s and 60s was the name Martin Luther King. And this past January, when they celebrated his birthday in the US, I came across an article that I kept because it really moved my heart. And I thought, there's someday I'm going to be able to use this in a sermon. And today's the day I want to use it. So, as you know, King was the undisputed leader of millions of Black Americans. He was their hero. He was their spokesman. And some even called him their shepherd. He shepherded them. Without him, Black people in those days would have been like the people in today's gospel. They would have been like sheep without a shepherd. King and his associates, his disciples, were like Jesus and his disciples. Oftentimes, they found it impossible to be alone by themselves, or someplace to be quiet and to get their energy back. For example, the story that I read talks about this hectic day that King had in Montgomery, Alabama. King had just gone to bed, and his wife, Corita, was already asleep. Just as he was dozing off, the telephone rang, and he picked it up quickly because he didn't want to wake his wife. An angry voice was on the other side of the phone, and he said, "Listen." Then he heard the N-word. "We're taking all we want from you. We have taken all we want from you. By next week, you'll be sorry you ever came to Montgomery." And then the caller hung up. The story goes on to say that King suddenly lost all of his courage. He was filled with fear, and it felt like a building was tumbling, collapsing on him. And all of his courage left him. He got up, went to the kitchen, put on some coffee, and sat down to try to think of a way that he could remove himself from the situation in Montgomery without appearing to be a coward. At that moment, with his courage gone, the story tells us he turned to God. And this is what he said, and they quoted him. He bowed his head in prayer. Lord, I am taking a stand for what I think is right, but now I'm afraid, terribly afraid. People are looking to me to lead them. But if I appear to be frightened, they will also become afraid. I am at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do. I can no longer face this responsibility alone. When I read that, the most striking lines for me in Dr. King's prayer are the ones where he says, people are looking to me to lead them. But if I appear to be frightened, they too will be afraid. In other words, to borrow the expression in today's gospel, they will be like sheep without a shepherd. See, every pastor of a parish, every teacher of a class, every parent of a family can identify with Dr. King's words. There's times in our life when we feel the responsibility of leadership is frightening. There are times in our life when we feel we can no longer carry the burden that's been asked of us, that has been placed upon us. There are times in our life when we feel like Jesus, who cried out in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, if it is possible, take this cup of suffering from me. When times of crisis like this come, what should we do? Friends, it's clear in our scriptures today and in this story, we need to turn to Jesus. We need to turn to God. Jesus did it. Martin Luther King did it. Saints and Christians throughout the centuries did it. But often today, we turn to other things instead of turning to God. I was reminded right after Jesus prayed to his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane, St. Luke writes, an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. When we turn to God, we are strengthened, even if we have a very heavy burden to carry. And right after Dr. King prayed to God on this memorable evening, he said he felt the strength, presence of God like he never felt before. He felt the presence of God. That's the practical message for us, for each one of us. It's simply this: when we have heavy burdens that threaten to crush us, we turn to God in prayer. If we do, God will strengthen us. I'd like to finish this morning by just paraphrasing today's beautiful song. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He gives me right paths for his name's sake. Though I walk in the valley of darkness, I will not fear, for the Lord walks beside me. He steadies me and strengthens me. And when my life fades, like the fading sunset, he will escort me into his home to live with him forever and ever. Amen.